In this endgame, there are many of the top professional North American teams, and they are competing for a total prize of over $600,000 and a spot in the Copenhagen Global Championships at the end of the year. Jumping right into the endgame of game 1 out of 12, many of our top teams start to make their rotates, and Miro and Cooper jump into Rokane's box and pick up an elimination before the lobby gets into the first moving zone. The second moving pulls and Viola and Npen make a great low ground rotate, but meanwhile up on height, Aviv and Skittles start to tarp before Skittles is shot out by a heavy shotgun, and Aviv starts to get his height pressured from Bryce and Chubbs, who's tarped to the front side and saw a free height take. Moving back down into the mid ground, Cooper is able to find a quick kill onto Rise, and Revised is able to find a quick spray elimination onto Re. Aders and Kanata find some kills onto the backside of the zone and run into the low ground where they get pinched by 2 teams and die.
Run back! I'm dead. No, I'm dead.
The 11th zone pulls, and Revise and Casker drop to the ultimate low ground while Bryce and Chubbs are on height. Meanwhile, Aviv continues to rat his way through the endgame as a solo before being picked up by Revise, and Casker and Fatch and Pamstu work their way towards the low ground themselves. The final moving reveals itself, and it's a 2v2v2, and the first team to go down is Pamstu and Fatch, who are forced to go through Casker and Revise before going down, but not before Pamstu hits a huge 185 shot into Casker. This leaves it down to a final 2v2. Bryce drops down and gets picked up, but Casker then quickly dies to the zone, and the game goes to a heal up. Revise finds a med mist in the zone, which he uses to win this game. After our first game, this is our top 5, with Casker and Revise picking up the victory royale in game 1. Going into game 2, our entire top 3 dies early as the Mammoth pistol runs through all 3 teams. Moving right into the endgame, many of our top teams rotate into the 8th zone, while Paper sprays and picks up an elimination onto Nuz. The 9th zone pulls, and Yamzo is left as a solo trying to make this rotation, and he makes it successfully by taking some clean angles to keep many duos off him. Other top teams like Poyo and Sphinx and Kanata and Agers run and tarp through the first moving, while Booga and Threats look at height for a second before being denied by Reet and Ritual, who hold it through the 9th zone. At the start of the 10th zone, Kanata and Agers go up for the high ground.
Spray them!
You stay on the back.
Yeah, go up! No mats.
No mats. I need to
I'm on it. Oh, you caught me. I got blocked.
They have no mats. They're gonna jump in.
Nice. Play that. I have nothing in my body. He's jumping in. He jumped in on my body. You win the game. It pulls over Citadel.
Moving back down to Yamzo, he goes into the zone and finds a kill onto Okus before quickly going down himself. Meanwhile, the zone is playing up the Citadel, meaning that many teams are going to need to elevate, and the ones who don't will go down. Many of our top teams like Bryce and Chubbs, as well as Muzz and Paper and Trashy and Clarity, make plays up the hill and find eliminations onto distracted players along the way. As the lobby gets up the Citadel, they all collapse onto each other. Following this chaos, we're left in a 1v1v1 with Booga and Bryce on the low ground and Agers on the high ground. Booga quickly shows his great awareness to pick up Bryce on his wall before dying to the zone as it plays back over the Citadel, giving Agers the win. Following game 2, there are massive jumps in the leaderboard as Kanata and Agers jump up to first place with their victory royale, and our top 3 fall down the leaderboard, reducing their chances of winning FNCS or even qualifying to the Global Championships. Moving into game 3, Pamstu and Fatch die off spawn early as they are contested by 3 teams at Frenzy Fields. Meanwhile, Agers and Kanatas land at the racetrack and trade Surge before going back and using slurp barrels. At the same time, Bryce and Chubbs land at Shady Stilts and find their cash on the ice. Going down to our 3rd place team, Reet and Ritual lands at Creaky Compound, and Reet, while farming up his materials, gets one-shot by Faz with a Mammoth pistol. Down in 4th, Casker and Revise land at Breakwater Bay, and in 5th, Cooper and Merrill land at North Slappy Shores. All of these teams start to rotate and collect their caches. Ritual gets the reboot onto Reet, and Chubbs picks up a kill onto DJ. As we move towards the endgame, Agers and Kanata get W-keyed by Stacky and Redux, who are below the Storm Surge. They respond to this by making a ton of space in metal, just letting Stacky and Redux get ticked by the Storm Surge. Meanwhile, Reet and Ritual are below Surge, and Bryce and Chubbs are on the backside of the zone. Both these teams try and fail to make game-saving plays, resulting in their deaths. Then when the 8th zone pulls, Cooper dies to a spray, and Miro dies shortly after on his max distance 8th zone rotation. Going into the moving zones, Booga and Threats are on height, and many of our top teams make simple sprinting and tarping rotations, but Revised as a solo runs out of materials and dies to rapid spraying him. The 10th zone reveals itself, and many teams drop down to the low ground, and Baka finds a quick siphon refresh onto Japis. The rest of the lobby settles in on the 10th zone, but when the 11th zone plays up a hill, chaos re-ensues. Batman, Booga, and Rapid work their way up the hill, and so do Jalix and Zeus, who find a kill onto Cold as they get up the hill. Acorn is able to get into a small cubby to survive, and the lobby turns into chaos on the edge of the hill, resulting in the deaths of Baka and Batman, Booga, and Rapid. There are now 3 teams left alive, and Acorn hits a nasty 2v1 onto Jalix and Zeus before dying in a final 1v2 versus Booga and Threats. Following game 3, Agers and Kanata continue to bolster their lead, but Booga and Threats jump up massively, as well as Notch and Wavy Jacob, and Acorn and Cold down in 6 jumped up a full 12 places. places after Game 3. Going into Game 4, the race for the FNCS win and the spots for the global championships continue to speed up. Looking at some of our top teams early and mid-game strategies, Kanata and Azers once again land at the racetrack and immediately get the slurp truck and begin to loot up very fast. This allows them to base up quickly near Mega City and get some surge tags before Mega City is expecting it. Meanwhile, Bugha and Threats are landing at this West Kenjutsu crossing split, and they rotate up onto these hills south of Steamy Springs and get a few tags onto the Steamy team. Going down to our third place team, Jacob and Notch land at this West Creaky split, and Notch plays into the trees looking for surge before healing himself back up with the slurp plants. Moving further into the mid-game, Bugha and Threats start to play deep into the zone while Bryce and Chubbs play onto their cache while they get fought by Peterbot and Larson. They play this fight exceptionally well, just making sure that they can get their slurp juices and then get out. Meanwhile, Kanata finds a spray kill into Epic Whale and Agers finds a spray kill into Vanillas. Bugha and Threats during this time make a late rotate into the 7th zone and get held and die, while Notch dies as well while trying to get out of the zone, and Wavy Jacob tries to survive for a little longer before getting picked up to the zone as well. Going into the endgame, Bolts and Thork claim high ground at the start of the moving zones, and many of our teams start their 9th zone rotates, but I particularly like this rotate from Dukes and Edgy, who use the dead side of the 8th zone to get an absolutely free rotation onto the 9th zone. Dukes and Edgy continue their great rotates into the 10th zone by running on the dead side of the 10th zone, and they pick up a kill onto Yumi by awareness checking his wall with the heavy shotgun. This kill onto Yumi left Source as a solo who jumps back into the zone with the slurp juices before getting a kill onto Larson's backside and continuing to play in the zone. Meanwhile, Bryce is in a low material situation and needs to jump into a box, and when he tries, he gets sprayed from the side and dies. At the same time, Yams is in the back of the zone and starts to get pressured hard from many different angles and ends up in a box and dies. During all of this, Thork and Bolts are still chilling on the high ground, but anyways, back on the low ground, the lobby starts to thin out as Acorn and Cold tarp to the front side before running out of materials, and then they got sprayed from the height team and died. Source is still a solo clutching, and he goes for a play onto Day, and despite hitting some good shots, he still goes down. Going back to Edgy, he is left as a solo and then is left dead as Kanata hits a big shot and finds himself with Day and Thork and Bolts on height. Thork and Bolts split up and play safe angles from height, which allows them to pick up both kills in the victory royale. After game 4, Kanata and Agers' lead continues to grow, but the main story of this game was Bolts and Thork, who put themselves on the map with this game, moving themselves up 23 places on the leaderboard following their victory royale. Moving quicker through game 5, all of our top teams make it off spawn, but when Bryce is running through the mid game, this happens. Chubbs then runs into the zone and gets 1v2'd. Moving a little later into the mid-game, Yamzo and Rise find themselves below the surge and they are forced to fight for their surge. In this fight, Yamzo dies and Rise disengages, but when he gets into the zone, he quickly dies. Continuing further into the game, Baka and Pars are holding height in the 8th zone. Meanwhile, Acorn and Cold begin their 8th zone rotation before they get jumped on in the backside of the zone. Acorn is now left as a solo. The 9th zone pulls and the teams in this lobby begin to rotate, but I particularly like Reet and Ritual's dead side rotate, and Bugha and Threats make a great rotation up the left side of the zone where they begin to elevate themselves in the zone. This elevation allows them to instantly tarp towards the front side of the 10th zone and spray back on Baka and Pars off the high ground, but right as Bugha and Threats are making this play, Reet and Ritual jump into the zone, making sure to keep themselves hidden before jumping right onto the high ground themselves. This change in the high ground scuffed both Bugha and Baka, and as a result, they both died soon after. Agers and Kanata run out of materials around this time and go down, as well as Acorn, who dies to Byla, who is having a great game himself. After killing Acorn, Byla and Enpen immediately create a good pinch shot to Bolts and Thork, and Byla is able to find a 3rd kill onto Convict. In the mid and low ground, we now have Enpen and Byla, as well as Day and Nazin and TK and Jackson. Day and Nazin spray back and find a kill into Peterbot, and Nazin is able to find all this loot, but Day goes down during this time. Nazin tarps in and runs out of materials, and therefore is forced to play Slurp Juice back in the zone. Meanwhile, TK and Jackson are claiming the low ground, but Byla and Enpen make some strong attempts to cut them off. The 12th zone then plays up a hill, and Nazin is forced back into the zone and quickly dies, but not before picking off Byla along the way. Enpen is left as a solo while Ritual and Reet are in height, and Jackson and TK control the mid ground. Enpen quickly dies and is now at 2v2, but Jackson and TK try to make a pinch play onto the high ground and get individually picked up, allowing Reet and Ritual to win game 5. After game 5, the top of the leaderboard is starting to solidify itself with Kanata and Agers in 1st, Bugha and Threats in 2nd, but moving down to 3rd, Reet and Ritual had a huge game here to push themselves up into the top 3, as well as Byla and Enpen, who pushed themselves into the top 5 for the first time today. Looking further down the leaderboard, Bryce and Chubbs drop all the way out of the top 10 from being in the top 5 most of the day, but going into game 6, they'll need to climb their way back out of it. Starting out in game 6, Acorn is roaming around his drop spot and it hits his slipstream when he gets fried out of the sky and dies. This leaves Cold as a solo who survives for a little bit but dies shortly after. Within our top 5, the only other team to die early is Reet and Ritual when Ritual dies on a fight at the Flag Island. Reet tries to get the reboot off, killing Aviv in the process, but he quickly goes down to Okus. Moving into the endgame, Threats and Bugha are running into the 8th zone and find Chubbs on their wall, and they quickly pick up this kill and move into the endgame. The 9th zone pulls and Cooper picks up a kill onto Osid, and the lobby starts to make the rotations. Thresh starts to look up at the high ground but can't get it, and Kanata and Agers look to jump into a team's box but fail. Despite Despite Kanata failing to find a refresh here, Pollo doesn't, as he gets a full box onto Batman Bugha, granting him the elimination. The 9th zone finishes closing and Threats goes down, but as the 10th zone reveals itself, the story of the game isn't what happens in the zone, but what happens outside of it, as Byla and NPen drop into the zone to sneak up on the high ground. They get this easy high ground, and meanwhile, Bugha hits a nice 1v2 onto Peterbot and Larson. Back in the zone, Agers and Kanata find a huge kill onto Bully, but when they go for the loot, they get sprayed down by Cooper and Muro, killing Kanata, and Agers barely survives. The lobby thins out as Rapid finds a kill onto Baka, and the 11th zone ends in the water. As the 11th zone ends in the water, many teams run out of materials, resulting in chaos on the low ground.
Nice. No, kill one on low, kill one on low. No, not bad.
Amongst all of this chaos, Byla drops down into the zone to get some materials and is able to get a knock onto Sphinx's back, setting Byla and NPen up with a 2v1 that they quickly close out. Following Game 6, our final day of competition, we saw huge come-ups from many of our top teams, but especially NPen and Byla, who end the day in 3rd. Pollo and Sphinx, as well as Cooper and Muro, also have huge end of the days, pushing themselves up the leaderboards. Looking at the top, it's looking like a race for 2nd, as Kanata and Agers have a huge lead, but there are still very important global championship spots on the line. If the tournament ended on day 1, teams down to Wavy Jacob and Notch would have qualified to the global championships, as Acorn and Cold, Pollo and Sphinx, and Bolts and Thork, and Muro and Cooper already have a spot in the global championship, so therefore their qualifications get pushed down the leaderboard further down to currently 14th on the leaderboard. There are also some of our fan favorites who are underperforming, most notably Bucky and Okus down in 42nd, Clicks and Epic Whale in 31st, Pamstu and Fatch in 28th, and Dukes and Edgy, who to be fair already qualified to the global championships in 21st. Let's keep an eye on some of these teams and see if they can make a big comeback on day 2. Starting with our first game on day 2, all of our teams have very similar off-spawn situations to day 1, which means unfortunately Pamstu and Fatch go down again off-spawn, but every other top team survives past their drop spot. Moving into the endgame, most of our important teams survive until NPen and Byla take a storm fight on the edge of the 6th zone and they get sprayed from the side, taking our 3rd place team out of Game 7 early. Every other team makes it into the endgame, which starts off with Paper finding a quick kill onto Esravino, who is very scuffed. From here, many of our teams make simple rotates into the 8th zone, except for Sphinx, who is a solo, and when he runs out into the 8th zone, Convict and Vanillas notice that he's a solo and double jump into his box. The 9th zone plays and Kanata and Agers are scuffed, and so they try to jump into Stacky and Redux's box to get a refresh. This play fails though, and they get pinched from 2 different angles, resulting in our 1st place team going down, allowing Bugha and Threats to potentially climb their way back into the 1st place picture. Meanwhile, teams like Bucky and Okus make a great rotate on this right side of the 1st moving zone, playing into the open space that the zone moves into. While Bucky and Okus are in safety, Muro and Cooper are, as Convict ends up in their tarp. The 10th zone pulls and Batman Bugha and Rapid slide tarp through the zone and find a kill onto Bugha, while Muzz and Paper hit a player hard and chase him down to the front side low ground. Moving towards height, Yamza and Rise start to pressure it but fail, and then they quickly drop onto the low ground, and Yamza picks up a kill onto Floto, but Rise goes down in the process. As a response to being a solo, he places Med Mist in the zone until he overplays it and dies. As the game heads towards the 11th zone, this is the outcome for many teams as the whole lobby finds themselves in the zone, and many players from Bucky to Batman Bugha die in the zone, and the game goes down to Muzz and Paper on the low ground and Clarity on the high ground. And while all of this is happening, Cooper is playing 3 Med Mists in the zone. Clarity gets quickly picked up and Cooper dies to Storm Sickness, resulting in Muzz and Paper picking up a huge victory royale in Game 7. After Game 7, our top 2 has remained the same, but Cooper and Muro have jumped up into 3rd place, and Byla and NPen have dropped all the way down to 6 after their bad Game 7. Hopefully this isn't signs of future troubles for this team. Moving on to our 8th game, Pamstu and Fatch struggle again off spawn as their qual for Copenhagen looks more and more fleeting, and disaster strikes again for NPen and Byla, who find themselves below Storm Surge while dying to the zone, and they go down with another 0-point game. Around the same time, Bugha and Threats rotate in late to the 6th zone and get held and die, giving Agers and Kanata an opportunity to bolster their lead even further, and their lead growing potential grows even more when Rise as a solo gets held on the 7th zone and dies. The situation continues to improve for Agers and Kanata as Cooper is also a solo, but he does survive for now, at least picking up a kill into Peterbot on his 8th zone rotation. Going into the 9th zone, Kanata and Agers make a fast and early rotate, and Cooper goes down on this rotate. Meanwhile, in the 9th zone, Baka and Pars look for a spray down and get awareness check, resulting in the quick death of this duo. In the meantime, Vanillas and Convict are holding height, but when the 10th zone pulls, Kanata and Agers quickly tarp to the front side and pressure height and take it. Kanata and Agers hold height through the 10th zone, and when the 11th zone pulls, a completely chaotic fight breaks. This leaves just Bryce and Chubbs alive in a 2v2 against Kanata and Agers, and Kanata and Agers close out this 2v2 with ease, picking up a second victory royale of this tournament, expanding their lead for the FNCS crown even further. Following Game 8, Kanata and Agers bolster their lead even further, and Bryce and Chubbs jump up 4 places, and the trend continues with NPen and Byla dropping another 3 places, almost falling out of the top 10, losing their chance to qualify to the Global Championships. Going into our 9th game, Day 2 continues to be a disaster for NPen and Byla, as NPen has no clue this is about to happen to him. Byla was then quickly picked up as this team gets 0 points in any of their first 3 games on Day 2. Continuing with some untimely deaths, Cooper and Miro are fighting Jalix in the zone, and Cooper makes a top row edit, resulting in his death. Miro would then go down to the zone right before getting out of the zone. Moving on to the endgame, Bugha starts it off with a great kill in the 8th zone before rotating into the 8th zone. When the 9th zone reveals itself, Bucky and Okus finally look to have their statement game as they hold height at the start of the moving zone. The 9th zone pulls and disaster strikes for our first place team as Agers gets jumped on and dies, and Kanata dies quickly after, leaving an opportunity for Bugha and Threats, or maybe even Yamzo and Rise, to take the first place spot back from Kanata and Agers' dominant lead. But it starts to look less likely for Yamzo and Rise as they spray in the middle of the 9th zone, and Yamzo gets sprayed himself, resulting in Rise being left as a solo. Besides these 2 deaths, most of the lobby survived the 9th zone, but when the 10th zone plays back, chaos will ensue again as Threats gets a kill onto Muzz, Vice gets a kill onto Boyo, and Source gets a kill onto Chris. If the 10th zone was chaos, then I don't even know what to call the 11th zone, as every team in this lobby forced fights onto each other. This chaos settled at the end of the 11th zone when Babin, Bugha, and Rapid take height off Bucky and Okus, forcing them back down into the mid-ground. Within this chaos, Chubbs is surviving for as long as he can in the zone before going down, and Bucky and Okus drop down onto Yumi, who knocks Bucky, but Okus survives and starts to play the heal off with the med mist, which allows him and Bucky to pick up a very important victory royale in game.
He's out on your right! Let's fucking go!
Following Game 9, the top of our leaderboard looks very similar to before Game 8, but Bugha and Threats are starting to close the gap onto Kanata and Agers. The largest changes on this leaderboard is Cooper and Miro dropping a full 4 places down to 6th, and NPen and Byla falling out of the top 10 entirely after being 3rd going into Day 2. Game 10 starts, and all of our important teams make it deep into the mid-game, but Agers and Kanata as well as Baka and Pars are fighting each other deep in the zone, and this fight results in both teams going down. The game continues on though, and the clock continues to strike midnight for Byla and NPen, who get pre-edited and killed by Acorn and Cold, but meanwhile Bryce and Chubbs also find the refresh going into the endgame by dropping down Batman Bugha. This refresh wouldn't translate well though, as they would quickly get eliminated on the 9th zone, but while Bryce and Chubbs had their game ended, Poil and Sphinx were ready to capitalize on theirs, taking height at the end of the 9th zone. The 10th zone plays, and teams like Bugha and Threats tarp to the dead side, but Bugha doesn't block his back, allowing Snacky to pick up the kill. Meanwhile, Acorn and Cold are in a comfortable spot in the zone, and so is Degen and Pump, as well as Poil and Sphinx on the high ground, but when the 11th zone pulls, chaos re-ensues, particularly with Threats. During this chaos, Cold finds himself in a 1v2 versus Boyle and Sphinx on the high ground, which he quickly loses. After Game 10, the lead between Kanata and Agers and Bugha and Threats continues to drop, and the top of our leaderboard is looking to look at least guaranteed to qualify to global championships. Moving on to Game 11, all of our notable teams survive into the endgame except for Cooper and Miro when Miro dies in a mid-game fight in Slappy Shores, and Cooper gets quickly picked up by Rice in the 6th zone. Moving into the endgame, it doesn't get better for Bryce and Chubbs when Chubbs gets forced into a fight with Fatch that he loses before Bryce goes down right after in the 9th zone. Meanwhile, in the 9th zone, Bucky and Okus are on the high ground and are looking to make a statement comeback. Down on the low ground, Yamza and Rise make a great rotate into the expanding side of the first moving zone, and Bugha and Threats find a kill onto Epic Whale, and even better for Bugha and Threats is that Agers also goes down on this 9th zone rotate, giving them an opportunity to close the gap. The 10th zone then pulls, and chaos ensues on the high ground as Reet and Ritual take it off Bucky and Okus, who are forced to drop, but they quickly recover their game when Bucky picks up 2 kills onto Vert and Roquet. Meanwhile, Rise goes into the chaos of the endgame from their safe position in the zone and dies, and Yamza is able to pick up a kill onto Bucky, leaving Okus to solo clutch. Okus continues to snake his way through the low ground, just collecting valuable points that could be the difference in this team's ability to qualify for the global championships. While Okus is solo clutching, Source and Yumi are completely vibing going into the final moving, as they both have great materials and are set up in a great spot to get at least a top 2 or better in this game. Meanwhile, Ritual and Reet are continuing to dominate the high ground, picking up many eliminations and slowly clearing out the lobby, which they're able to do, picking up many kills before Source and Yumi die in the zone, giving Reet and Ritual the victory royale. Going into our final game, our top 3 is pretty solidified with Kanata and Agers in first, Bugha and Threats in second, and Yamzo and Rise in third. but there's still a ton of volatility that will have massive impacts on who will qualify for the global championship, so all we can do is go right into Game 12. Game 12 might as well be two different tournaments, as some of this lobby is trying to win the FNCS, while other teams in this lobby are just trying to qualify for the global championships at this point. In contention for winning is Agers and Kanata, Bugha and Threats, and Yamzu and Rise. Opportunities arise for 2nd and 3rd place when Agers and Kanata go down on the 8th zone, and Yamzu and Rise get a bigger chance when Bugha and Threats go down on the 9th zone, but unfortunately they weren't able to close it out, dying towards the end of the 10th zone. This solidified Kanata and Agers with the FNCS win, but there are still global championship spots up for grab, and they become even easier when Bucky and Okus go down fighting for the Rift Island, and Yumi and Source go down to Surge on the 7th zone. This gives tons of teams around the middle of the pack the ability to jump up and steal a global championship spot. But most of these teams face max distance 9th zone rotate, which causes huge issues for many of our teams on the edge of qualification. With Npen, Trashy, Rokan, and Batman Bugha all dying on this rotate, this left Byla, Clary, and Vert left as solos trying to clutch. The 10th zone pulls, and Muzz and Paper find a kill into Baka, securing the low ground for themselves. Meanwhile, Vert finds a kill into Acorn, and they start to play Slurp Juices in the zone. All three of these solos are so close to qualifying, but they need to make something big happen here. Although these three solos couldn't do enough, Muzz and Paper continued to have a phenomenal game before going down in 5th. After they died, the rest of this lobby didn't have a major impact on the leaderboard, but Bryce and Chubbs were able to close out Game 12, concluding our final game of FNCS. After 12 games played, Kanata and Agers won the FNCS Championships, winning $150,000 of the over $600,000 available in this grand finals, and our 13 teams down to Yumi and Source, just cutting off Byla and Npen, are going to be at the Global Championships in Copenhagen, which you can watch in October. Peace.